Well, what a joy to be with you, folks. It gives me such encouragement to meet with people who care about our society, our better selves, our planet, our brothers and sisters all over the world. When I attend such events, leave feeling hopeful. And although I promise not to ask any of you to vote for Liberal in the by-elections going on this month, I do need to say that I was door knocking today in Calgary Elbow, our former Premier's riding, and I had a most poignant experience at the door with a Middle Eastern man, single, employed, but poorly so, who said, "No, I won't be voting, even though I'm now a citizen of Canada. I don't believe it makes any difference. I have given up, and I do not feel the world is going to survive." And with that, he was about to close the door, and uncharacteristically, I stuck my foot in the door. I couldn't bear to leave him that way. I had to say, and being a physician, what can I say? I just said, "You sound depressed." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Can we talk?" And just then our leader, Dr. Raj Sherman, happened to come up the steps, and he took over, and I went on. But Raj then spent 5 minutes with this man. I don't know what happened. I didn't see him afterwards. But it reminds me why we're here. Many of us have lost hope. Many of us have lost a sense of where this world is going. And with the conflicts going on around the world and our own sense of powerlessness, even in influencing some of our own leaders, there is a strong sense that we need to come together, encourage each other, and find a new way, both locally and nationally and internationally. And a few people in this room are doing that so wonderfully. I want to acknowledge our Treaty 7 folks here who have come in from Stoney. Bill McLean, son of Chief Walking Buffalo, thank you for being here. And his daughter, thank you for coming. We have Tina Fox and Trent, who are here also from the Stonies, long-standing. Would you stand up, Tina and Trent? Thank you. They have also been courageous leaders in their community and continue to be part of this initiatives of change that I have grown to love and feel such support from. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Arthur Clark, who has started a foundation here called Calgary Centre for Global Community. Arthur, would you stand? Amazing work in this city, bringing people together to talk about what justice and social progress and sustainability means. Many people in this audience are doing so many wonderful things. I also wanted to recognize Ashkan and the Gandhi Society, Dr. Tony Perel, who started the Gandhi Society some 15 years ago, he was telling me. And what a wonderful way of bringing together the values of initiatives of change, which has been going for about 60 or 70 years, and the Gandhi movement. There's such a lot in common around the force of love, satyagraha, and ahimsa, nonviolence. And they share such a common vision of self-service to the community. I can't tell you how inspiring it's been working with Keith and Joy Newman here in Calgary for the last 15 years, and young people like Alex and Monica, who jumped in their early years here from Mexico and have stimulated things in the University of Calgary. So wonderful work going on. But I am here in a very honored position to introduce Rajmohan Gandhi, whom I met, I think, when you came to receive your honorary doctorate here at the U of C, Raj. It was a wonderful thing for me to participate in and to get to know you a little bit at that time. Raj Gandhi is the grandson, of course, of Mahatma Gandhi. He's a professor, journalist, and former Indian politician. Raj Gandhi is currently a research professor at the Center for South Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, University of Illinois. It's in Urbana-Champaign, US. Associated with the I of C since 1956. I was only 7 then, Raj. But you began inspiring me at that age, even though I wasn't aware. Raj has been engaged for half a century in efforts of trust building, reconciliation, democracy, education, and in battles against corruption and inequality through the 60s and 70s. He's part of the Asia Plateau Center in India, where some of the work of Initiatives of Change also goes on, and a place I intend to visit. He played a leading role in establishing the Asia Plateau, and there's an annual conference there, just as there is at CO. During the India's 1975 to 77 emergency, he was active for democracy rights, personally and through editing the weekly journal Himmat, published in Bombay from 64 to 81. As a member of the Rajya Sabha, upper house of the Indian Parliament, from 1990 to 92, Rajmohan led the Indian delegation to the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva, 1990. His well-published, comprehensive biography of his grandfather, Mahatma, called Mohandas, a true story of a man, his people, and an empire. It was published in 2006 to critical acclaim. He's also written several other biographies, including one of his maternal grandfather, C. Rajagopalacharya. No, didn't say that right. I won't try it again. Who was the first governor of India. In 2004, he received the International Humanitarian Award for Human Rights from the city of Champaign, and in 1997, he was awarded an honorary doctorate, as I mentioned, at the University of Calgary, as well as an honorary doctorate of philosophy from Obrin University, Tokyo. He currently serves as a jury member, Nuremberg International Human Rights Award, and co-chair Center for Dialogue and Reconciliation in Gurgaon, India. He's worked consistently for India-Pakistan and Hindu-Muslim reconciliation. We need you here for First Nations and Western society reconciliation, Raj. Since 9/11, he has also tried to address the divide between the West and the world of Islam. A Muslim-non-Muslim dialogue at CO Switzerland, which we saw earlier in the video in 2002, was one such initiative. He was unanimously elected as president of Initiatives of Change for a 2-year term, 2009 and 2010. And later in 2010, he embarked on a 6-month voyage of dialogue and discovery across 15 countries to listen and support those who are working in the grassroots for local Initiatives of Change teams. Rajmohan is married to Usha. They have 2 children, Supriya and Devadatta. Thank you, Dr. Rajmohan Gandhi. Please address the gathering.
Thank you very much, Dr. David Swan. Now, my theme that was agreed between the organizers of the conference and me was something like looking in and reaching out. Now, I've been associated with Initiatives of Change for at least 58 years. For many years, I was a full-time worker with it. But I've also found myself a historian for 4 decades or so, which means that I should be able to look at Initiatives of Change both as an insider and as an outsider. As a historian, I've observed at least 2 significant contributions of IFC. One, it has spread and made normal the idea of listening to the inner voice. Frank Buchman, the founder of Initiatives of Change, had not made an original discovery that enabled him to say, "When man listens, God speaks." He was only repeating with total conviction what had been said for centuries and in different parts of the world. But Frank Buchman and the teams he helped build, the Oxford Group, MRA, IFC teams, have taken this old idea directly to hundreds of thousands and indirectly to millions in our world. You may think it was normal and natural, say 30 years ago, for a columnist or a commencement speaker or a legislator to refer to the inner voice. It was not. People found it awkward to speak of it or even to listen to someone speaking of it. The picture is different today. Not that all of us are all the time listening to the inner voice. Just now, all of you are only listening to me. But no one is shocked if someone from any platform Whether at an international conference, a concert, or even in a sports arena, when someone speaks there of what the inner voice may have told her or him. In this change in the world, a large role in my assessment has been played by Frank Bookman and the various teams directly or indirectly created by him. These remarkable multi-class, multi-racial, multinational, and increasingly multi-faith teams. By the way, since Anthony Perel, the great Gandhi scholar, is here, I must also mention that Gandhi has also made the inner voice a concept that the whole world can hear of quite normally. Now, the second significant contribution of Initiatives of Change is this. For all who are present here, and today, in fact, for most Canadians, a monocolored, one class, one race, one gender, and one faith gathering would seem almost bizarre today. 5 decades back, the opposite was true. Someone from outside of one's group was an oddity, at times maybe an exotic and distinguished oddity, at other times and more often peculiar, abnormal, and even threatening. The many-hued world that has become the new normal first made its appearance in the 1950s in the conferences and plays of moral rearmament, as Initiatives of Change was then called. When in 1957 we took the musical play The Crowning Experience to Atlanta, Georgia, US, the only place in that city where the multiracial cast could stay together was a motel owned by an African American. On the first night, the audience in the theater was racially separated. From the second night, all sat together. When 43 years later, I was again in Atlanta as a visiting professor, more than one local person told me of their personal memory of the dramatic change that occurred in Atlanta in 1957 when The Crowning Experience was shown in that city. My first close encounter with MRA took place in 1956, only 58 years ago, when I arrived in Edinburgh, Scotland, as an apprentice journalist with a great newspaper, still doing well, called The Scotsman. I arrived there as a reasonably okay 21-year-old. I was fairly harmless, but also quite useless. I had some idealistic bones, maybe. No doubt I also had the biases of a young man of my background, but I had no purpose and I had no drive. I was content to let events shape me. Soon after my arrival there in August of 1956, I learnt of the inner voice from a variety of people. Some belonged to the family I was staying with as a paying guest. Others were friends of this family, or were coal miners, or clergymen, or young men wanting to be doctors or dentists. For the first time in my life, I went deep down inside a coal mine with one of these coal miner friends. I won't bore you with the details of what the inner voice told me when I tried to listen to it, but a couple of simple truths I learned in Edinburgh have stayed with me all these years. One was, live by appreciation, not by comparison. The other was, live to make the other person great. Then there was this tiny, ordinary, and yet for me a moving experience. Christmas and the New Year were getting close, and I was in a large store in Edinburgh to buy a few cards at the last minute. So were scores of others trying to do the same thing. Suddenly I found a tiny hand taking hold of the fingers of my large hand. It was a little girl who for the moment had lost her mother or father and probably thought I was the mother or father. For the first time, I had felt the sensation of being totally trusted by a very young white child. Not that I was asking myself whether or not Scottish children trusted me. That question had not entered my mind. But that little girl's instinctive human reaction in that pre-Christmas crowd in Edinburgh dissolved forever the silly barrier that had unconsciously existed in my mind between me and what I short-sightedly saw as a monolithic thing called the white race. I feel like mentioning another very tiny incident. This one occurred in 1958 on Mackinac Island, Michigan, where IFC then had a large and beautiful center, which Canadians supported generously with personnel and with money. Frank Bookman and a few others, including me, were standing at the entrance to welcome 4 truck drivers who had brought equipment or material or maybe food for the center. Dr. Frank Bookman, 80 at this time, introduced me to the drivers. I was 21, 22. Diffidently, I stepped forward, shook hands with 3 of the drivers, but forgot the 4th driver. Frank Bookman pointed out my omission, which I quickly rectified. Not what I was doing, but the other person had to be my concern. It is a lesson I've been trying to remember with only limited success all these 56 years. Some years before my transformative Edinburgh time, perhaps when I was about 14 or 15 and living in New Delhi with siblings and parents, I saw a picture and a caption that riveted me. The picture was inside a book. I don't recall how the book got into my hands. The picture showed a thoughtful boy sitting at his desk. On the desk was a globe. The caption said, "God has a plan for you." This thought that maybe God had a plan for me made quite an impact. It did not lead right away to anything much, but the picture stayed with me. I have forgotten many things from that time, and from recent days also, but not that image of an earnest, searching, willing boy at a desk with a globe or that caption, "God has a plan for you." An amazing thing. God has a plan for me. Even for me in particular. If this is true, then every day has a meaning and every incident has a purpose that fits into the plan. Probably, and this belief has kept me going all these years, yet I must add an important rider. The focus on me carries a risk. Even a focus on my people or my nation or my cause may carry a risk if the focus excludes other people, other nations, or other causes. Even when I'm inspecting my or my nation's sins rather than lingering with my or my nation's virtues, there is the risk of coldness towards others as long as I remain the sole object of my interest or my cause or people remain the sole object of my interest. I think I want a picture that shows a young man in profile, off to one side, and maybe not too brightly lit, and a globe before him and people on the globe, and a spotlight that goes out to the world with the caption, "God has a plan for her and him and for everyone." I want to remember all the time the role that others can play. I have not done nearly enough of that. For nearly 6 decades or more, I've known that when something nice or worthwhile happens next to me, it very rarely happens through me. Generally, it happens in spite of me and never ever because of me. One more thing. I don't want to lose that visionary gleam. When I lose that great belief, I want to repossess it. But I also want to learn patience. We've all had to practice patience again and again, especially patience with near and dear ones. But also patience when an all-powerful God appears to permit injustices and sufferings to continue and seems not to intervene even when total innocents suffer. I do not understand this reality. I'm often puzzled and angry even. But I accept the difficult advice of the saints who have said that I must not question the unsearchable judgments of God, that I must continue to trust him and to pray and pray and pray. Meanwhile, I must do all I can to reduce injustices around me, even by a millionth of a millimeter. And I will take heart from the simplest blessings, the littlest miracles of each day. And there are so many of these every day, adding up to another powerful reality that enables me to confront the injustices of the world, that enables me to continue to pray and with hope for an end to those injustices. In 1975, 40 years ago, I had the opportunity to join in the opposition to the emergency, as Dr. Swan mentioned just now, that many felt was imposed for personal rather than national reasons. Early in the morning of 26 January 1975, when my wife and I arrived by train at Madras Central Station, today it's called Chennai, making the 36-hour journey at short notice, we had to sleep on newspaper sheets on the floor of the crowded coach. When we arrived at the station platform, we heard of people having been arrested overnight and of a declaration of emergency. For the following 19 months, along with a number of others in India, my wife and I were engaged in efforts to defeat the emergency, maintain the morale and unity of those opposing it, and inform the world of the emergency's authoritarian laws and rules. By the way, here I must mention, Indira Gandhi was the prime minister who imposed the emergency. She was prime minister of India for many years. Many people in the United States, when they meet me, say, "Oh, we have a high regard for your mother." I say to them, I too have a high regard for my mother, but her name was Lakshmi Gandhi, not Indira Gandhi. and that even Indira Gandhi might not be too pleased to be called my mother because she was only 18 years older than me. But Indira Gandhi was the daughter of Gandhi's close associate and colleague Jawaharlal Nehru. She married a man called Gandhi, but he was not part of this Gandhi family. So Indira Gandhi and I are not related. So this weekly himmat that I was editing at the time, and in other ways, I confronted this emergency, which ended after 19 months. Many were imprisoned, I was merely harassed. Attempts to silence himmat and to kill it financially failed. The journal's popularity grew and copies were smuggled into jails where himmat was read by a range from left to right of the opponents of the emergency. Chris here was a fantastic member of the himmat team, Chris. Now, the effort to reach out to other foes of the emergency had to be discreet, but it has also been my good luck to be able to reach out openly to people through my 11 books, all of them studies in biography or history. Unless I have successfully deceived myself, I have aimed in these books to be as objective as possible and also frank. Now, here is where I'm really going to tire you. I'm going to speak to you of 3 of my books. My History of Punjab, which came out a year ago, covered a 240-year span that saw wars and strife, yet also impressive cooperation at ground level between supposedly bitter enemies. Punjab has deep ties with Canada. If we exclude English and French, apparently more Canadian legislators know Punjabi than any other language, although I don't know whether Cantonese or Mandarin also perhaps now competes with Punjabi. For much of the 18th century, Sikh and Afghan clans clashed for control over the vast area called Punjab, where Muslims formed the majority of the population. Eventually victorious, the Sikhs ruled Punjab for about 80 years, until the late 1840s, when the British conquered Punjab and controlled it for a century. And the year 1947 not only saw the division of Punjab into a preponderantly Muslim half that went to Pakistan, and a preponderantly non-Muslim half that remained with India, it also saw great carnage and a great two-way migration. What happened in that traumatic year of 1947, but also every previous incident in the 240-year history of Punjab, has invited sharply conflicting accounts from Afghan perspectives, Sikh, Hindu, Punjabi Muslim, British perspectives, and often more than one version from each of these different perspectives. So I was wondering whether what I had produced would at all be acceptable to anybody. And in my preface, I wrote something like this. Now that despite difficult odds, this book has happened, I have a few prayers regarding it. That it might prod some to pursue their own research into Punjab's history and ask new questions. That a few reading this work may conclude that there was more to the Punjab story than they had thought, more complexity and richness perhaps, or maybe more humanity in the other side than previously realized, and that our inherited, unexamined beliefs regarding what occurred in Punjab's history may need revising. Unquote. Now, I've been extremely lucky. Sikh, Muslim, and Hindu Punjabis have all suggested that my account is honest and fair. Pakistani comment has been as positive as comment from Sikhs and Hindus in India, and a Punjabi translation in the Gurmukhi script is in the pipeline. Carnage was not the whole story of Punjab 1947. In their villages and towns, many ordinary Punjabis protected vulnerable ones and helped them escape. In recent years, attempts have been made to obtain and record these life-saving acts. One such effort was made in Lahore during 9 days in July 2005 by my wife Usha and me, when we were able to have more than 24 interviews with persons with memories of 1947. Our report was published in newspapers, and it invited fresh comments. And it was obvious, these reports and the response confirmed that courageous deeds of protection were widespread in 1947, and also that those who performed or witnessed such acts recounted them to succeeding generations. If more such stories are accessed and shared, there can be a correction of the underreporting of the humanity that in 1947 coexisted with the savagery. Now, I was thinking of quoting from some of these interviews, but I will skip one and I will read the other one. This is a lady we met in Lahore, and she talked about Jalandhar, which is in Indian Punjab. She now lives in Lahore. On 19 July 2005, in her sister's home in Thokar Niyaz Beg in Lahore, we met Sughra Rashid. In broad terms, we had known from her niece Aruna Kamal, a friend of ours, that Sughra Rashid had lost several relatives in the city of Jalandhar. In 1947, she was a young wife and mother in Delhi. Her husband, Abdul Rashid, was a railway officer from a family hailing from the villages of Singhpura and Uggi near Jalandhar. The husband's brother was a young doctor, also Delhi-based. The husband's father, a retired railway officer, lived in the railway colony in Jalandhar city. We asked Sughra Rashid for the names and ages of those who had been killed in August 1947 in Jalandhar. Her answer was given clearly, calmly, and solemnly, and filled with brief pauses as she tried to remember. This is what she said when asked who were the people who were killed. Dr. Badruddin, the father of my husband, he was 60. Fatima, my husband's mother, she was 55. Jamila, their newly married daughter, my husband's sister, she was 25. Tahira, the younger daughter, who was 22. Kutubuddin, my husband's nana, maternal grandfather, who was also my dada, my paternal grandfather, he was 80. Idu, who was a mulazim, servant. Idu's wife, Fateh, 5 children of Idu and Fateh. Now, I was very moved by this brief recreation through naming of the killed, and perhaps especially by the naming of the servants. Like the vast majority of the killed in 1947, the servants had lacked the means or critical contacts in the military or the police or the railways that made escape possible for many of the better off, though not in this case for Sughra's relatives. The reason why, even now when I read this, I've done this quite a few times about Idu and his family who were killed. The vast majority of those who were killed in 1947 in Indian Punjab were the very poor. Some from successful families, middle-class families, were also killed. But the vast majority were the very poor, and their names are not known till today. So she went on, Sughra Rashid, about her family. The family was living in a Hindu mohalla, Hindu neighborhood, on the main road with only 2 Muslim homes. Amne Samne, in front, was a Hindu family who had said to my husband's family, "Don't go away." I remember 2 girls from that family, Sheila and Dhannu. I don't think the family could have been involved, Sughra added. I think they were helpless before the attackers. Sughra had a happier story too to tell. Her husband's older brother Sharif was in Solan, also in East Punjab, with his young wife and 2-month-old daughter. Their lives, said Sughra, were protected by Hindu friends who then helped them to move across to West Punjab. But Sughra's Nani Aisha, maternal grandmother, who was part of a walking caravan trying to reach Pakistan, died on the way, as also the Nani's sister, Jeena. After recounting these events, Sughra said, "Itna Jalandhar yaad aata hai, jab koi Jalandhar ki baat karta hai, dil mein kuch ho jata hai." I remember Jalandhar so much. Whenever anyone speaks of Jalandhar, something happens inside my heart. So all these relatives are killed, but she still has this feeling. In recent years, we've also gotten to know Sughra's son Salman Rashid, who is one of Pakistan's best-known travel writers and photographers. Salman has been conducting an amazing journey of reconciliation with those who are connected to the killing of his grandparents and aunts and of Idu and their family. He's actually met close relatives of the killers of his family. All going well, a book by Salman on this journey should come out before long. Meanwhile, earlier this year, Salman planted a tree of reconciliation at Asia Plateau, Panchgani, India, that David Swan spoke of. No graves exist of Salman's people killed in Jalandhar, but they are commemorated in that tree in the hills of Maharashtra. When it was planted in January, people from different races and corners of the world sprinkled earth or water over this little tree in memory of people close to them who had lost their lives through violence and in prayer for healing. So while on the subject of Asia Plateau, let me express deep gratitude for the substantial help with people and money that Canada has given to it. And since this is my first time in Alberta after her passing, let me particularly thank Phyllis Bocock, who spent such time at Asia Plateau. Phyllis here stands for so many Canadians who have helped us, not just for herself. A wonderful book that is contributing to healing the trauma in Punjab of 47 is called Savage Harvest, a collection of short stories about 1947, recently published in New Delhi. Stories written by the late Mohinder Singh Sarna, a wonderful Sikh writer, translated from Punjabi into English by his son Navtej Singh Sarna. Those who want to reach out to heal anywhere will find strength from this little book. It's called Savage Harvest. The other day, after I spoke in a city in the US of Punjabis protecting one another in 1947, a Hindu Punjabi present sent me this account of what his mother did in the city of Amritsar that year, 47, when she was in her teens. This is her talking. This man telling the story of his mother when she was in her teens. My mother was the oldest among 8 children in a middle-class trader's home in Amritsar. Despite local customs, she had been educated till at least 12th grade. Grandfather was a tough local leader. They lived in an old part of Amritsar near the Golden Temple in one of these gullies, narrow streets, which had only one entrance, heavily fortified by 2 sets of heavy metal doors. Mom told us the story of how she saved 4 Muslim girls from the gully on the opposite side of the bazaar, street on the opposite side. She would talk about it, pointing to a well near the barricaded entrance. She always said a silent prayer while passing that well. Mom had persuaded her father, who despite great risk agreed to hide the girls inside the well. Down the well, attached to its circular brick wall, were a few narrow wooden brackets. These 4 girls stood for hours all night on these precarious footholds while angry mobs came through, rattling sabers and looking to expel and so forth. These girls were barely friends of my mother. Several days later came the riskier task of getting them to the border and then to one of their relatives in Lahore. There was no confirmation that any of their families had even survived. Fortunately, our family's contacts at the fluid Atari border helped them get through. Just as many Hindus and Sikhs protected Muslims, many Muslims in the western part of Punjab protected Hindus and Sikhs and helped them over to move across. Now, another book of mine I wanted to mention was written 28 years ago, originally titled 8 Lives, a Study of the Hindu-Muslim Encounter, but called Understanding the Muslim Mind in its paperback editions. This book has been published in India and the US and translated into Urdu, Hindi, Malayalam, and so forth. This book tries to understand the Hindu-Muslim question of the South Asian subcontinent via the lives and interactions of 8 Muslims who were prominent in the half-century before 1947 trauma. Some of these 8 were in favor of India's division, others were against it. One of the triggers for this study was my memory of a 1951 incident when I was 16 years old and living with siblings and parents in the 3rd floor apartment of a building which also contained the offices and printing presses of the Hindustan Times, the paper my father was editing. A young sub-editor ran up the steps to our apartment with a sheet hot off the teleprinter, which he wanted my father to see. I'd opened the door and he showed it to me first. It read, quote, Liaquat Ali Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, has been shot at MTF. I knew that MTF meant more to follow. I raised my head from this paper and said to the journalist, I hope what follows is the news of his death. Liaquat Ali Khan had done me or mine no harm. Our paths had never crossed, but he was Pakistan's Prime Minister and Pakistan was India's enemy. Although I was expecting a smile at my remark, this journalist only gave me a stare and I felt deservedly small. Reflecting later on my stupid remark, I realized that apart from nationalist prejudice, I was wanting to appear macho, but so were millions in both Pakistan and in India. My 8 lives arose from a wish to unearth the facts, the truth, and a wish also to understand the 8 individuals from their 8 different perspectives. I hoped that truth and empathy might assist in this difficult journey towards mutual forgiveness, reconciliation, and peace. From time to time, People in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, Hindus as well as Muslims, have referred positively to this book. In recent years, after 9/11, but also before it, my reaching out has occurred also in the context of Islamist radicalism and of the divide between the so-called Muslim world and the West. In that context, allow me to mention a third book of mine. This one is about one of the most remarkable heroes of nonviolent struggle, a Pashtun called Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who died in 1988 at the age of 98. A man who lived both in Pakistan and Afghanistan, one who fought for independence from British rule and for democracy after Pakistan was created, one who because of his struggle had to spend 15 years in British prisons and 12 years in Pakistani prisons. Ghaffar Khan was also called Badshah Khan or King Khan by hundreds of thousands of fellow Pashtuns and the Pashtun Gandhi by many others. In explaining his commitment to nonviolence, Ghaffar Khan would often speak of the Pashtun tradition of revenge. Quote, "We only know too well the bitter results of violence from the blood feuds. We indeed have an abundance of violence in our natures. It is good in our own interests to take training in nonviolence. Moreover, is not the Pashtun amenable only to love and reason? If you win him, he will go with you to hell, but you cannot force him even to go to heaven. I want the Pashtun to learn to do unto others as he would like to be done by." Unquote. From 1920 to the 1960s, Ghaffar Khan was astonishingly successful in getting his message across to tens of thousands of Pashtuns. Recalling the non-violence and reconciliation practiced during his Mecca phase by the Prophet of Islam, Ghaffar Khan would say, "There is nothing surprising in a Muslim or a Pashtun like me subscribing to non-violence. It's not a new creed. It was followed 1400 years ago by the Prophet all the time he was in Mecca. But we had so far forgotten it that when Mahatma Gandhi placed it before us, we thought he was sponsoring a new principle or a novel weapon." In that region where Afghanistan and Pakistan meet, that unfortunate part of our world where suicide bombers, IEDs, and unmanned aircraft bring abrupt death day after day, in that region the memory of Ghaffar Khan is not dead. When, God willing, sanity returns there, the legacy of Ghaffar Khan and of the thousands of men and women who fought non-violently at his side will be the foundation of a new future. A Canadian, I'm glad to tell you, has made a major documentary film on Badshah Khan. T.C. McLuhan's film is called The Frontier Gandhi, Badshah Khan, A Torch for Peace. I trust that growing numbers will see it. Now we all know that Islam is at times presented as an explanation for the violence of our world. If true, this explanation should worry us greatly, should worry us night and day, for in virtually every part of the world, all of us live quite close to Muslims, or we are Muslims. I am, let me disclose or confirm, a Hindu who has often had Muslim neighbors. In either case, whether we are Muslims or living close to them, we should worry greatly if being Muslim was somehow the heart of the problem. Or maybe we should stop worrying and enjoy ourselves while a world in which at least one Muslim majority country has the nuclear bomb gets ready to blow itself up. But trying a little logic, let us look at the headlines of our world's violence in the last 100 years. We can think among other events of World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, Stalin's Soviet Union, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, Rwanda 1994, Sudan in the last 30 years, the DRC in the last 12 years, Sri Lanka for 30 years, the Indian subcontinent in 1947. People calling themselves Muslims indeed killed and were killed in India, Pakistan, and in Sudan. But all the other headlines, those screaming headlines, involved people calling themselves Christians or atheists or Buddhists or Hindus or whatever. If being Muslim was not a central factor in the violence of World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, Stalin's Soviet Union, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, Rwanda 94, Sri Lanka and the DRC, how come that many believe it to be a central element in violence today and for violence tomorrow? Is it that humanity has changed dramatically and selectively in the last 25 years, with all the non-Muslims suddenly becoming peaceful and forgiving, and all the Muslims suddenly becoming violent? If today's images of violence often bear Islamic features, is it rational, let us ask, to locate the cause in the Islamic religion, the Islamic holy book, and Islamic culture? Or should we be looking at events in the world and the world's response to those events? Should we be looking at events of history that may have angered whole sections of people, including Muslims, providing power-hungry and headline-hungry individuals amongst those sections with destructive fuel? Now, ISIS. We have not seen anything as brutal and savage as this in a long time. At least presented like this with pride to all of humanity. And so many people have concluded in the world that this group has to be met with stern force. And that's absolutely understandable. And nobody can dispute that or disagree with that. Another thing has happened as a result of ISIS. For the very first time, at least in my memory, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, so many other countries of that region have all said we must stand up to this horrible thing called Islamic State. Sunni nations, Shia nations, this has happened. It's absolutely amazing. But I feel that we have to use this amazing moment when so many people are together and all Muslims, non-Muslims, everybody agreed that this kind of brutality and savagery is absolutely impermissible. The killing of Christians, the Yazidis, the Shia, the non-Muslims, the treatment of women is just beyond the pale. The limit has been crossed. Every limit has been crossed. But the great question before us is, will we use this moment to do adequate thinking, adequate reflection, real examination of the events that have caused this thing? Or shall we all conclude, yes, Islamist radicalism is the great evil that the whole world must fight? This I humbly but earnestly and strongly suggest is what everybody who's concerned about that region has to ask in Calgary, in Canada, and in the whole wide world. That whole region, we speak about the quiet time, about the inner voice. Who will get the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Iranians to sit together? A small group maybe, a few to begin with, one or two to begin with. There are these incredible groups. Now Canada is, of course, humanity is all found itself in Canada's vast spaces. There is no dialogue that cannot be started in Canada that will have an effect on the rest of the world. There is absolutely no situation in the world with which Canada is unconnected. And the people are here, all around you. So who will take the initiative to befriend them, to knock on the doors, to put their foot inside their doors, to enter their homes, and to encourage conversation, dialogue, frankness, courage. Two very brief thoughts, and I will sit down, and if there are questions, I'll try and answer them. One of them is about India, the final thought. Glad as I am that in the last 20 years, tens of millions in India have escaped from poverty, I burn for my country to be of real assistance to humanity as a whole. Becoming rich and a permanent member of the UN Security Council is not enough of a goal for India. May India and its people embrace humanity and strive to respond to humanity's thirst for healing and for peace. And I have a similar longing for the people gathered here and for this amazing country called Canada. Here in Canada, we confront an air so fresh, spaces so endless, and a nature so well preserved by the weather, cold weather, that we are reminded here that God is close and that God is great. This sense today when Mike took me to this wonderful park, nature, Nose Hill. So I had that feeling, God is so close and God is so great. Canada gives that feeling. I pray that all of us, Canadians, Indians, all of us humans, will approach this idea of the inner voice and the related idea of the quiet time, not as a formula, not as a technique, but as part of who we are.